Hi, I'm Amy. I'm 23 years old from Chesterfield. 3 years ago I was involved in a drink driving accident while I was on holiday. So we'd been on a night out, just a few beach bars, and decided that it was time to go home because I was tired, jet lag. And basically we were waiting for a taxi to take us back to the hotel. So my ex-boyfriend went and spoke to the taxi driver and just asked how much it would be. I sort of turned to my left and seen that people were sort of waving their hands frantically, and I couldn't really understand what was happening at first. When I looked to my right, I saw that a car had mounted the pavement. It just drove straight into him and crashed into the wall just where I was sitting, just a few feet away from me. And I just remember thinking that if he still stood there at the taxi, then it's fine, the car's just undertook him, no problems. If he's not still stood there when the car's gone past me, then I need to start panicking. And obviously as the car went past me and crashed next to me, I looked up and he wasn't where he was stood before, and he was just laid on the floor, and I thought he was dead. That was the first thought in my head, that he was dead on the floor. I was stood in the middle of the road sort of screaming, asking for somebody to just help me while he still laid on the floor. Then obviously when he came round sort of from being knocked out, he'd just dripping with blood. He had blood all over his face, blood dripping down his legs, it had gone onto his shorts. And at that point, I think his adrenaline and shock kicked in, and obviously we went straight over to the person who'd hit him, who stumbled out of the car, and just a hit of, you could just smell alcohol straight away on him. And that was when we realised obviously that he'd been drink driving, and the anger at the driver sort of maybe made us not realise the extent of what had happened. So when, we're sort of shouting at the drink driver because the police weren't really particularly there to help us, we were more concentrating on that until it was at the point where I sort of lifted the back of his t-shirt up and his whole back was just scuffed over, like complete gravel rash all over his back. It was just bleeding everywhere. His ankle was just pouring with blood. And then obviously the back of his head was bleeding from the impact of the ground, which when obviously I felt that part of his scalp was missing. So it just turned into a bit of a nightmare really. Like he was covered in blood, and it ended up me being covered in blood as well because I was trying to comfort him. Obviously when the police got there, eventually, I think it was about after 2 hours, they weren't that bothered. They sort of offered us money to say, like, take this money and we'll just leave it at that, no repercussions. The driver even offered us a lift to the hospital if we wanted it, which obviously we turned down. So I got home from the holiday about 2 weeks later, and I don't think it had quite kicked in yet what had actually just happened. People were asking me, did you have a nice time? And I'd say, well, yeah, it was nice, but Tom got run over by a drunk driver. And they'd be like in complete shock, like, what? But obviously it hadn't quite hit me yet that it was as serious as what it was. It was only when about 3 months later I started to experience just intense nightmares at night. I wasn't sleeping at all because I was terrified to go to sleep. I was on sleeping medication from the doctors to try and help me. I was put onto antidepressants, and it was only when they referred me to get CBT counselling was I diagnosed with PTSD. And 3 years later, to this point now, I still experience flashbacks of exactly what happened while we were there. So I remember my ex-boyfriend saying to me that he's got the scars physically, like on his back and on his head, but he wishes it was the other way around, and that he had to deal with the mental effects of it after, because he's fine now, he's well, he's healthy, but it's still 3 years later on and I'm still struggling mentally. And I don't think people realise that, yeah, you can injure people physically and you can, harm them significantly, but there's also like the mental health side of things where people are struggling with the effects years later, and I'm stuck with PTSD probably for the rest of my life now. Before the incident happened, I probably would have recognised drink driving as something that you shouldn't do, but maybe not realise just how damaging it can be. And I tend to sort of try and get the point across now that it's one decision in your life of literally like not getting in a taxi or not getting a lift from someone or not walking home, that you're ultimately putting someone else's life at risk and people around them just to drive your car while you've had a drink. There's no reason for it at all. We were lucky compared to some other people that are involved in similar situations. It could have been a lot worse. He didn't die. However, I'm still sat here now and everyone around me is fine and happy and healthy, but I've still, for the rest of my life, will remember exactly what happened that day when the drunk driver ran him over.